I know what you're probably thinking. This seems incredibly random to go with a WWF Mankind era Mick Foley and MJF. But as Mick Foley was talking about trying to do his last match before he got a concussion in the ring, lots of people reached out to him. One of them, of course, was one Maxwell Jacob Freeman, who had mentioned doing a 6-week arc with him that he had pretty much had written out. And I was like, well, if anybody could do something amazing with Mick Foley where he's at this point in his career, definitely be MJF. Knowing what he did with his CM Punk feud, I could almost see MJF having something where he's like, when I first started wrestling, I originally was going to call myself, like Maxwell Jacob Foley. And I was be like your illegitimate son from one of the Road Rats, something crazy like that. So since Mick has had numerous concussions recently while training, he's probably not going to do a match for when he's 60. So of course with this, let's run through this. So we'll look at one of the pillars of AEW and MJF. Again, I'm going with Mick Foley from an earlier time in his career when he could still, physically go in the ring, but of course making this is his last run. Okay, so from a stats perspective, it's weird when it's like, oh, MJF was born in '96, so when he was 1, I graduated from high school. So he's billed at 5'8", 226. Mick Foley, billed at 6'2", 287. So that means Mick Foley, if that is accurate, would tower over MJF. But let's go through this. Strength. I don't think it was going to have any issue with me meaning that MJF is still in significantly fantastic shape. He definitely have a strength advantage over someone like Mick Foley. Same with speed, same with endurance. Even when Mick was earlier in his career, it was less of his overall stamina. I mean, he wasn't doing Iron Man matches. So Mick's bread and butter entirely came from his toughness. His ability to just take an absolute beating in matches and keep on going. Whether it's being tossed off of a Hell in a Cell, being tossed through a Hell in a Cell, getting a bunch of chair shots, being slammed on the concrete, losing part of his ear in a match and still finishing. Mick Foley is the legendary $2 steak when it comes to toughness. Striking. I'm going to give the striking edge on this one to Mick Foley. Yes, the King of Kick is amazing. MJF won't do that anymore because he's a heel. I understand it, which is fine. But if you look at Mick Foley's primary attacks, it was, the big running knee strike in the corner, or the big running knee strike that he would take to his opponent on the outside, who would then move out of the way as Foley would then slam his full body weight and then flip over the steel steps. Or the punches and just the strikes. He is very much a brawler, which is entirely fine. So I don't think from a striking perspective, I would give the edge to Foley. Grappling, this is MJF. Whether it's brain busters or the suplexes or a heat seeker, he does, or even going so far as, the Long Island Sunrise. I mean, he just has a much wider array of moves that he's busting out on a pretty consecutive basis. Ironically, when it came to submissions, I thought about, well, Foley had the mandible claw, and that was very much one of his way of winning matches. And then I looked at more at MJF, like, well, MJF had the Salt of the Earth armbar, which he used an awful lot. I was like, But he also used the label lock while feuding with Daniel Bryan. He's used a Scorpion Deathlock. He's used a figure 4. I mean, he's used a whole wide array of submission moves depending on who it is he's facing. So, it's like Mandible Claw, fantastic submission move. Won a lot of matches. It's like, am I looking at a more devastating move or a wider array of moves? And I was like, for a very long period of time, Sacco was what was winning matches, and Sacco was also who was paying the bills. High flying. MJF not known for his high flying abilities, but he does have the Fosbury flop. He does do quite a few, top rope and middle rope moves, primarily to soften up the arm. Where Foley just kind of had the cactus elbow dive from the apron move. So I'm like, well, you know what? It's going to be one of the very few times MJF will probably take it from a high flying perspective. Over with the crowd. Again, looking at this primarily from the aspect of if this is Foley's last run, this is his last match, crowd's going to be behind him 100% of the way. And with this being an AEW crowd, I know that Tony would give the proper amount of pomp and circumstance to really, really get over how amazing Foley's career has been. So I definitely do think from over at the crowd, this being Foley's last hurrah, and also knowing that MJF will have spent 6 weeks turning the crowd against him, specifically to get Foley to have that massive standing ovation and that massive pop when his music hits and he comes down to the ring. Ring psychology. I do think we have two masters at this. But also throwing, if this is Foley's last match, he's going to do things. He's going to throw out moves. He's going to do things we haven't seen him do. And he's going to have that, he'll really have that emotional connection with the crowd, which he'll very easily be able to manipulate and run with. MJF is no slouch in this category at all. But again, with this being Foley's last match, I could see the crowd, one, being really super behind Foley, and every small, minor detail that Foley will throw into this will just really connect and just be a really amazing viewpoint of that. Now I'm on the mic work. I'm giving this to MJF. Since he mentioned having 6 weeks written up for this, and like I mentioned earlier, I could see him having some moment where he's like, well, MJF was going to be like Maxwell James Foley. I can picture him throwing something like that out. And MJF, while being both a face and a heel, has shown this amazing ability to get the crowd to absolutely love him and the crowd to absolutely want to see him be eviscerated with a rusty spoon. I mean, he can generate a tremendous amount of sympathy and heat. I mean, he's tremendous when it comes to what he can do on the mic. And knowing that he's the person who will be teeing this up, I very easily picture MJF doing a fantastic job really selling this sort of match. And I do picture that with the way this is going, Mick Foley is old school enough that he will do everything he can to go out on his back and to really try to make an even bigger star out of MJF, which, this is one of those things where it becomes a feather in MJF's cap that you can always point to. That's amazing. So I do think that these two could have had that match. I do picture MJF going over. I don't have any issues with that. Foley would probably also want him to go over. MJF might go back and forth if he wanted to go over or not. So that's just my thoughts on this. And as always, disagree. I'm glad you've made it this far in the video. That's what the comment section is for. If you liked it, disagree with me, you leave your comments as to why. Also, dislike button. I'm fine with it either way. Thank you for watching this far.